The following is an Ice on Mars presentation.
When they got up that first morning, the little white finch was dead. The bottom of the cage was covered with a thick layer of loose feathers, and it looked as if there had been a violent struggle before the bird finally gave up the ghost. "I wonder if it was just his time to go," Tepe Kano said softly. "How old was he, anyway?" "He was only 4 years old," replied Tepe's wife, Maseo. "We bought him right after Tamao was born, remember?" "Oh, right. That seems like an abnormally short life, even for a bird. Maybe he was sick or something. Or he might have hit his head during the move and gotten injured somehow. Maybe when the cage was jostled. I think that's more likely." Misao opened the door of the metal cage and gently placed the dead bird in the palm of her hand. The tiny body was already cold. When Masao held it up to her nose, she caught a faint whiff of dried grass, the same earthy scent the little finch had given off when he was alive. Hot tears filled her eyes. Making an effort not to cry, Masao stroked the stiffening corpse with her forefinger. "Poor little Pyoko," she murmured. "You were so cute." "He really was," Tepe agreed. So begins The Graveyard Apartment by Mariko Koike. This episode on
dread.dialectic.
Dread.dialectic.
Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Michael T. Bradley.
And this is Scix.
And today, as noted in the before stuff, we're going to be talking about Graveyard Apartment. Graveyard Apartment, this is your choice, Scix, but I actually did read this one.
Yes.
All the way through. Before we get into talking about it in detail, let's go ahead and go through a basic plot outline. What do you say?
Graveyard Apartment by Mariko Koike. That's my guess at Japanese. I took about a month of Japanese. It was published last year, but originally published in '86. A small family.
Oh, wow. Is it really that old?
Yep.
Huh.
A small family, father, mother, and child, move into an apartment building that has a really good price. Is fairly conveniently located in a lot of ways. Kind of stands in the middle of nothing, except it's right next to a cemetery. Thus the title of the book.
Dun dun dun. A Buddhist cemetery.
I don't know enough to know how much difference that makes. I really don't. So it seems nice enough, and the superintendents are nice, and the longer they're there, the more weird things start happening, and like their neighbors start moving out, and like there's a dead goldfish that the daughter thinks she's talking to, and
Oh, it's a parakeet.
Parakeet, yes. And it sort of has a poltergeist vibe to it in parts. That is the movie. And there is something in the basement that is just unsettling, but no one actually ever sees anything. And like the little girl at one point gets hurt. She's like in the dark shadow, and she gets gashed.
Oh, Scix, it's just a weasel wind.
It's just a weasel wind. We'll talk about weasel winds in a sec. Honestly, that's the setup, and it doesn't go much beyond the setup. It's just that the bad stuff escalates a bit, and they try to move out, and the building seems to actively thwart their attempts to leave. Yeah, I think that's it for summary.
And of course, we'll save spoilers till farther in what we're talking about. Are there any trigger warnings that are worth mentioning here?
I cannot think of any. Can you?
No, I mean, I really can't. It's all
Dead parakeet.
yeah. So yeah, let's talk about the good, the things that we like that don't include spoilers.
I thought the setting was very well depicted. The mostly empty apartment that, while being new, still feels like an old castle or something. I like the way the cemetery was next door, but probably honestly didn't have anything to do with anything. Or maybe it did. I like that they didn't explain all the fine details of what was going on, but there was a lot of like looking out the window going, "Oh, look, a cemetery. Some people would think that was unpleasant, but it's fine." And I believe in Japan there may be some traditions about unluckiness and cemeteries that we don't share, although we do have the whole whistling past the cemetery or holding breath past the cemetery thing.
There's obviously at least much more, and of course this is 30 years old, so maybe this is different now, but there's a lot of mention in the book about how it's important to kind of keep dead people in your mind, even while you're alive, right?
Yeah, I mean, and there's a long European history of that too. The whole memento mori thing. As I am, you will be.
It's in fact one of the lines that I highlighted simply because I really personally enjoyed the way that, and I don't know if it's because it was translated or if it's because I just kind of like this in a horror novel. Tepe, the father, is the more, what would you say? He's kind of the Scully of the pair,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
he's the skeptic. He's the more in the real world, and he says at one point, "We're too busy living to worry about people who are already dead." And his wife, Maiko, is that her name? What was her name? Something like that, right?
Sure.
You know, she's kind of offended by this because she feels like that's kind of the wrong way to go, and she seems the more traditional one.
Right.
So
Although all of them are in denial up to the last second, especially when the family members come to visit. I think that's about where I'd be under those circumstances, because all the bad stuff is plausibly deniable up to a point. Or
sure.
Mysterious in a way that's like, eh.
I don't even want to comment on it until we get to the end where we're gonna say spoilers because I have so much to say about that. But for sure, like the Weaselwind thing seems insane, but it also seems like, I'd buy it, right? I mean,
Will you talk about the Weasel Wind? Since that seemed to really grab you.
it triggered me. So there's this part where Tamao, I don't know
Sure,
how
I think that last way is pretty close.
the daughter is playing in the storage basement, and the storage basement is just all sorts of fucked up because first of all, there's no only the elevator goes down there. There's no stairs. There's no emergency exit way. So of course there's all sorts of hijinks with the elevator throughout the book, and like even though the parents are like, hey, that storage area is creepy and weird, and if there was an emergency we couldn't get you out of there, so of course the kids just all immediately want to go play there. And when they're playing down there, Tamao is attacked by something. She sees like a weird presence again in this one area, and she's attacked, and her knee starts bleeding like crazy. And the explanation that the doctors come up for it is that it was a stray weasel wind, which is a wind that can occur that hits in just such a way that it can actually break the skin, and because it's kind of like a paper cut, because it's so thin, right, that you sometimes don't feel it. So the theory was that, you know, this is this basement with no way to the exterior. The theory was that she was outside playing first, weasel wind hit her, she started bleeding a little bit, they went down in the basement, more tension on her leg or whatever, the blood started flowing more, and that's when she noticed it. And that's when, and with kids a lot of times there's this thing where like it doesn't hurt until they notice that they've been hurt. So that was the explanation for it. But it just, I mean, it made me think of Frank Zappa's Weasels Were My Flesh, which I find amusing, and B, it made me think of that Mexican vampire thing that MST3K did years ago, where it's like, you know, she's like, oh, but I saw a bat in the window and it turned into a demon, and he's like, oh, sometimes mirrors play reflections like that. I often see demons in the mirror. Like, it's just so like, no, look, okay, she was playing in this friggin' basement, nothing was around, she sees a dark presence, her fucking dead parakeet is talking to her, move, you know, it's time to move, so.
And it should be noted that Weasel Wind was not an invention of the book. It is, however, perhaps the silliest way to phrase it in English.
Perhaps. There's a lot of traction with the Weasel Wind, I think.
Yeah. And you're right, there's the move thing. It takes them a long time to get there, but there's some resistance to that.
Yeah, and I get it. It's this place is cheap, and I mean, it's like, it's called an apartment, but if I understood from how they were talking about having paid for it, I think it was more what we would, it was what we would consider a condominium, right? So
right.
It's not just an apartment where they gotta like pay twice the first month's rent or something to get out of there. Like they have to go through the business of selling it and yada yada yada.
Right. And who's gonna want to buy the last apartment in a giant empty apartment house next to a graveyard in a horror
rife
novel.
with weasel wind.
Yes.
Other things that I enjoyed, there's this section, I don't even know at what point this is or exactly why this is there, but I just really like this quote. That's how it is. Fear begets fear, and regret breeds more regret. Once you invite those emotions in, they will flourish in your damaged heart like a kind of sickness, and you'll start to feel perpetually dissatisfied with your situation, while your life force ebbs away and your mind becomes permanently warped.
I have that on my tombstone.
I don't know, I thought that was a nice little section, and I thought,
Yeah.
this is the sort of introspection I want from a horror novel.
Yeah, I agree.
That's also something that I wanted to bring up that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed isn't the right word in this, but I liked about this novel is the whole kind of, you had mentioned we never really talked about what makes a horror novel, and for me, one of the things that really kind of cements a classic in the sense of what I think of as a horror novel, not necessarily always good, but a classic horror novel is that I think your protagonists have to or protagonist at least, one of them, has to kind of come from a place of pain and be trying to overcome some past trauma. And I felt like, in different ways, Tepe and... God, now I feel so bad because I don't remember her name. I think it's Mariko. Tepe and his wife are trying to get past the fact that their relationship started as him cheating on his then wife, I believe Reiko, and Reiko committed suicide so that they could be together because, she couldn't deal with the shame and so on and so forth, and they've kind of built their life, and his wife is more interested in kind of paying homage to her memory than Tepe is, because Tepe is the more realistic live in the day sort of person, and she's like, no, we can't forget that that's where our love bloomed from, even though we have made a good life for ourselves. And I really liked that as a background for these characters.
Yeah.
I felt it made a good sort of horror novel background.
The mother's name is Misao.
Misao.
I mean, the characters were fairly cardboard at the start, and we learn more about their background, and just sort of the idea that this little family is kind of putting on a happy face with that kind of tragic event at the core of the shaping of the family itself.
Right.
Colors a little bit how they treat each other and how they look at the world. And I don't know, I may be reading a little too into it, but their move is very getting a new start sort of thing. And I think their resistance to seeing bad things may be part of that. Like, no, this is our fresh start, goddammit. No ghosts. No.
Plus, it's a parallel, right? It's like, no, I'm not going to let the dead have sway over me trying to enjoy my life, right? I think just in general, Tepe, at least, is really fighting for that.
Yeah.
Poor Tamao is kind of caught in the middle through everything. Poor Cookie. Poor Cookie is really caught in the middle. Cookie's their dog.
Oh, right, Cookie.
Cookie's just like, I didn't do anything. Something that I guess I'll classify as good is I thought the translation was good. I mean, it's tough to say that because I can't read the original Japanese. I mean, I'm sure I could find the book, but I can't read it as in I don't know Japanese.
Right.
But it felt eminently readable to me.
The original won a number of literature awards, so it was probably fairly well written.
Cool.
Yeah, I thought it was a great translation.
Yeah, it was very simple and straightforward, but also when it started to get lyrical, it didn't feel out of place.
Right.
So let's go ahead and talk about the bad. Again, we're going to stay spoiler-free here talking about this. Scix, do you have any bads that you...
Mostly that I wanted to punch the in-laws in the face.
I was wondering if we were going to talk about the in-laws. I really liked... Talking about how much I like the main characters, I really liked the in-laws, seeing... so that we didn't see just a traditional Japanese sort of like... I mean, because our main characters... As much as they do have depth, they felt very much like kind of stock casting good Japanese, or, modern Japanese family, right?
Right.
I really like the in-laws and seeing just this completely different style of people. I really enjoyed them until the very end, and then I just laughed completely.
I think they're well written and useful to the narrative and all that, and I still wanted to punch them a lot.
I kind of kept hoping that his brother would dive more into, like, maybe trying to get Tepe to go whoring with him or something, and it never, it at times flirted with that, I think, but it never quite dropped over into that, and I was really excited about that. They just, every time they showed up, I kind of felt like there was a disco ball and oonce oonce music in the background.
If not that, then some sitcom soundtrack.
Sure, I could see that. There's this one part that kind of annoyed me, a quote, "If you're bullied, you need to respond aggressively." That is them teaching their daughter how to deal with bullying at school, so I didn't really like that.
See, now, I don't know enough about Japanese culture to know if that's a typical response from parents, or if that's saying something significant about their parenting.
Either way, that kind of made me unhappy. Oh, I totally forgot my biggest point that I wanted to make in the good. So, in the first half of the book especially, and this is why I'm not saving it till the end, in the first half of the book especially, I think the horror imagery is so goddamn good. Like, it is really, because first of all, it's so it's so snuck in there. It's almost subversive. It's so subtle. It's almost subversive. Like, this novel, you could easily take out all of the horror elements, and it would feel. I mean, the ending would be weird because it would just kind of stop 3/4 of the way through. But for the most part, you could take out the horror elements, and it would just read like kind of a family in a new house getting over this tragedy in their past and having annoying in-laws and kind of wacky neighbors, and it would totally work, right? There are little things where, like, the parakeet dies their first day there, and Tamao, the daughter, the parakeet starts talking to her at night, and her mom's asking her about it because she's like, oh, she's working through her grief, and honestly, she might just be. It's never really clear, right? That's how subtle it is. And she starts asking her about it, and she's like, yeah, she can't speak. Humans speak really well, but she's really scared of the faceless men with the big mouths. And it's like, oh, fuck, man, that's creepy as hell, right? And it's little things like that. And then in the basement, it's kind of like there's or like on their TV, there's this dark shape in the corner that's vaguely human going through all these postures. Like, it's just enough information for you to find it unsettling, but it's like, are they just dancing? Or are they being tortured? Or what the hell is going on, right? My favorite moment, I think, was when one of them gets into a cab, and the cabbie's like, says something like, oh, I'm glad it was just you. I thought all those people were coming with you. And they're like, what are you talking about? I was on my own on the corner there. And they're like, no, there were all these people dressed in black right behind you. And that, I found that utterly creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, I thought the horror imagery, especially in the first half, was just phenomenal in this book. Just so well done. It really worked in getting under my skin. I think that's why I kept reading on this book, because I was just like, oh man, these are great images. Because, I mean, it's nothing amazingly new, but I think there's... I don't know if this is a cultural divide or not, but I feel like, like I think about The Deep, right? And in a lot of ways, it's kind of probably one of the closest books that we've read to this, simply because, it's like, it is very much straight up horror, and like it's got a main character, it's kind of family dynamic related, and there's a lot of tragedy in the past. And I think, like, with every sort of scare that's in The Deep, like, it's like, we had like 3 pages describing a dead dog walking around, right? And with this, it would be like a shadow of a dog passed in the hallway, and that would be it,
I heard the clicking of the dog's toenails overhead.
There you go. Yeah. So I really like that. Back to the bad. I didn't like the bullying.
Right.
And I mean, maybe that's totally normal Japanese stuff, but hey, get your shit together, Japan.
Yes, our country is absolutely one to talk.
Oh, God.
I'd like to see a movie. It's very visual, or a lot of it is. I think it'd be a good movie.
Yeah, certainly.
And then you could recut the trailer so it sounds like it's a sitcom.
You really could. Like, I felt like 2 things were shoehorned in there, and one will kind of lead into spoiler, and one won't. I felt like the mystical old Buddhist priest or I think he was a Buddhist priest, right? Essentially the mystical old man. I felt like there should have been more with that, and then instead we got like a lot about zoning laws and zoning histories,
Right.
and I was like, those parts I really just skipped, and I'm like, with the way that this book is written, I know they're going to explain it to me again, and I really don't want to read. Misao basically tries to find out about the history of the area, and it's like,
The underground shopping mall sounded interesting. I was kind of hoping we'd get more from that.
it does tie into the end, but not in a huge way. That whole zoning section did not work for me. I was like, you don't introduce a mystical priest character who can like control the chi of the place or whatever, and then just jettison him like that.
Then he
just
moves out.
Yeah. It's like, come on, man.
You know, in horror, he's supposed to be killed by the ghost. You know, because he tries to hold his faith against the evil.
Sure.
And fails. That's how that's supposed to work. But no, he just moved out before it got really bad.
Yeah. Instead, he gets a 2-bedroom in Chelsea or whatever,
Yep.
and it's like, okay, well, cultural divide, right?
Sure.
So let's talk about the ugly, and for the
Alright.
ugly, we go into spoilers, and this might be good things. It doesn't necessarily have to be bad things, but we're gonna do spoilers and talk about what the monster is and what we thought about the ending and things like that.
Well, once our family are the only ones left and things start getting really rough, they do finally agree to move out. And I think twice they set up to buy a house and it burns down.
They set up to buy a house and it burns down, and then the second one is their fallback house, the woman there mysteriously dies, and so it's considered a crime scene and can't be sold.
Right. It definitely seems to be the tower block fucking with them.
Yeah.
They were finally going to leave, and so the in-laws came over to help them move, and then the building said, no, fuck y'all, you're not getting out, and became sort of this impermeable building out of space and time that no one can hear or see through. Then they eventually went down to the basement, because that's where the bad is coming from, and really vague what happened.
Yeah, so my main problem wasn't that we didn't really get an answer as to what was going on. I was okay with that. My problem is, what the fuck were these ghosts or whatever's plan, right? Because it's like, A, if it was that they wanted everybody to get out of the way, because here's how I interpreted what went down, and I don't think it's necessarily the answer, but I think it is at least the main proposition proposed. It is that there's this cemetery next to the apartment housing, and there was this underground shopping mall proposed in that area. They started to dig on it, then for whatever reason their license was revoked, and so they just kind of left this giant pit, and it disturbed the graves enough so that these ghosts became angry. But it's like, okay, if that's the case, A, why didn't it take down, like, the construction crew or whatever? And I mean, maybe they did, but B, it's like, okay, did they want souls in the house that they could bring over to the other side or whatever? And if they did a shitty job of that. Did they want to have everybody leave so that they could have peace and quiet? Well, they were on their way to that, and then they did a shitty job of that at the end. I mean, did they just want to scare people? I mean, it just seems like either they would want more people there for whatever reason, in which case you don't start haunting people until the place is full, or they want people gone, in which case you don't trap people in the damn apartment.
Here's my theory.
All right.
The place was more or less dormant until our family moved in. It was our family's, for want of a better word, sin, and or the spirit of the suicided ex-wife, or late wife, kind of triggered the house to go berserk, and its ultimate end goal was just to punish the family.
I don't think that's true because people were talking about how things had happened before they moved in.
Okay, so maybe it was running on level 1 until the family moved in, and then it jumped to 10.
I guess that could be.
I do have another theory that ties in. Everyone that moved out, some of them didn't really move out.
That certainly seems like a possibility as well, yeah. Like, for instance, one of the people who moves out, I think either right before they get there, or maybe they meet them for a day or whatever, owns this company that makes protein bars, and there are tons of protein bars left in the basement, and it's like, okay, they obviously got murdered, right? Because
Right.
why would they leave all of these protein bars?
Probably stuffed inside the storage unit, one of the storage units.
Oh, that could be. The ending, the very end of the book, is a new, like, hey, newly, under new management, blah, 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 place looking for renters, so we know that it keeps going on, whether that's per its wishes or against its wishes, we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it had to loosen up or no one would ever get in the door.
Right.
Literally, no one would get into the door.
I found that kind of amusing when, like, their moving people came and they would get up to the door, they couldn't get in, and then they would just explode.
Yes.
That felt very Japanese, just kind of
Yes.
like that's the ghost's way of making sure they don't get out. Like, oh, these guys could get to a phone.
And that's also a way of messing with the people inside. Like, if you successfully get word to someone to come help you, you're dooming them to die horribly.
Essentially, the last third didn't work for me because I was like, well, do you want them to leave or not, House? And if you don't want them to leave, just fucking kill them. Like, why are you playing with them like cats with a mouse? It just felt very annoying. The idea that maybe they are punishing them for their sin, I feel like the little girl and the dog kind of got short stick here.
Well, yes, as happens.
And if it had perhaps ended with Tamao and Cookie on the street, like just crying and not being able to talk about what happened, then I think I could buy that interpretation more. But I don't know, maybe it's sins of the father.
Or alternately, I mean, considering what little I know of Japanese mythology, it could be that they weren't that the spirits or whatever were more trickster based. The fact that some of their jokes are deadly didn't occur to them, but they're just pranking them up until the end.
I could be. Our absolute final image are the families in their apartment sweltering in the heat, and they can't because they can't open any windows, and the elevator door opens, and there's the sound of essentially these ghosts coming. So maybe they're just like, "Oh, come play with us."
And the people exploding outside the door, maybe that didn't happen because, I mean, there's evidence that the house can sort of block or disguise from view. Like they're jumping up and down, and they threw like a banner down the side of the building, and clearly no one could see them. So it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say that the house was fucking with them there too.
I suppose that's possible, though I just interpreted it as them being way the hell away from, like, I picture them on this essentially deserted road. But who knows? That could be. It got very Belko experiment there with those parts. The whole kind of, trapped in a building and trying to get people to notice that you're trapped there. And then it's like, oh, if people do try to help us, they're fucked. So, okay, plan B, I guess.
Yeah, and it gave me just a tiny vibe of Dianea House, and I think it was after I read Graveyard Apartment that I recommended we do Dianea House.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, it's definitely, it does feel like a fly trap, right? I mean,
Right.
it's trying to, it seems like it's trying to trap people. So I overall, I really did not like the ending, but I have to say I did love what happens to the in-laws. Just the fact that they're like, no, this creepy dark hole in the wall, I think it totally leads to a train station. We're good. And then it's just like, ah.
And I'm assuming that crack led to Under the Cemetery.
I saw it as kind of leading to the underground shopping station, the ghost of it, and then once you get in there, then it returns to being just dirt.
Ooh, I like that.
I'll say in general, Japanese horror, the ending always leaves me a little, like, head scratching. I had to, like, read online to figure out what the hell was up with the ending to One Missed Call. I know there's been a lot of kind of argument over the end to Audition.
Oh, God, that movie.
I love that movie. I love Miyake, however the hell you say it.
I do. Gozu's my favorite, though.
So anyway, if you agree, disagree, or unrelatedly have something that you would like to submit for us to read, a novel or novella, or sometimes we'll do a single short story, then feel free to drop us a note, dread.dialectic@gmail.com. Otherwise, please feel free to comment below or however you're viewing this. And of course, always like and subscribe. For now, this is Michael T. Bradley.
And this is Scix.
And I forgot to pre-sell our next book. It's going to be The Descent by Jeff Long. So until then, we are